Yes, Jeff is coming. So he's on his way.
All right, so I'm the filler, but we're going to make this fun anyway. So, Jonathan Abrams, can we have an early round of applause for him? Let's just do it. Go. Sweet. So, we've known each other for a while. I don't think I knew you when you were Friendster, but I think I met you in Nuzzle days when you were starting Founders Den, which is one of the first, you call it co-working spaces, accelerators, what do you call it, incubator?
It wasn't the first co-working space, but some of the ones that were big in San Francisco back then are actually gone now. So there was Dogpatch Labs, which was run by a VC, but I think the city kicked them out of the pier. So there were a few others. Obviously now there's way more. There's probably a co-working space on every block of San Francisco, it seems.
And what's the hook for Founders Den in today's crowded marketplace of co-working spaces?
So Founders Den is like the complete opposite of WeWork in the sense that, we're not huge. We're not trying to make money off of real estate. It's really meant to be a community. Mm-hmm. So me and 3 friends started Founders Den. We wanted an invite-only, curated community for ourselves and for friends. So there are companies at Founders Den that we've invested in and can go either way, but it's really meant to be a community. And we've also had, in addition to startups, we've also had a lot of venture capital firms that have been headquartered at Founders Den.
Cool. I think I've been to a Christmas party, although I seem to have been bumped off the invite list somewhere along the way. But
no.
Who's keeping track, right?
There was one year we didn't have one, and a lot of VCs complained to me that we took them off the list, but we just didn't have one.
Yes. So you've done 50 deals, angel deals, some interesting ones like AngelList and Front, very popular, hot app right now. Instacart, I think. Let's talk about how you either got into these deals or how the deals found you. How are you matching with some pretty interesting deals?
So while I was doing investing, I was running companies like Nuzzle, which we just sold a few months ago. So I actually had pretty limited bandwidth to be just meeting lots and lots of different companies. So some of those companies were at Founders Den. So for example, when we met Docker, they were called .cloud, and they were at Founders Den very early, and we invested. Some of the companies have been Y Combinator companies, and Jeff will hopefully be here soon. So I think I probably met or saw Front in this room, and they actually were at YC Demo Day. They had already raised a seed round, and Jeff Clavey, who just spoke here, had led the seed round, and I looked on Mathilde, the founder, I looked on her Twitter account and saw that she had just followed Jeff, and I put 2 and 2 together and figured, I bet he's the one who led the round. So I pinged him and I said, introduce me to her and tell her to squeeze me into the round.
Okay. Of the 50, how many of you sort of squeezed yourself into versus how many have approached you at a conference or some other, channel getting into you?
It's a mix, and sometimes it's companies that I meet that want my advice on something, and then I end up, liking it and investing. But when I was running Nuzzle, I didn't really have time to just meet all the emails I get about investing. I just didn't really have time to meet all those folks. So it still had to be pretty opportunistic.
Yeah, and now, well, I guess we can't go too deep into this, but now are you picking up the angel investing side or doing other things? I guess we can't really talk too much about it. Skip that question. How about tips for founders that want to get on your radar? I mean, it was interesting. We talked back there about you're going to YC Demo Day and some other channels. What other radar screens are you sort of paying attention to find startups?
So with Founders Den, what we like is we like companies to get referred to us through our network, which of course is how generally people raise money from both VCs and angels. And of course, there's some people who say that if you do that, it's getting in the way of diversity and certain things because it's hard for people to get the introduction. When I moved to Silicon Valley from Canada, I didn't know a soul. And we didn't have AngelList, we didn't have LinkedIn, we didn't have any of those things, or blogs, any of that kind of stuff. And I just had to go out to tons and tons of events and do a lot of networking. So I think the reality is if you don't have anybody on the founding team who's good at networking, it's going to be difficult to get press coverage, to hire engineers in San Francisco, to raise your Series A, all those kind of things. So the reality is somebody can look on, for example, the Founders Den website, and you can see who our sponsors are. You can see startups that have been at Founders Den. You can see VCs that have been at Founders Den. You can see all this different stuff, and then click around and probably figure out some way that you can get introduced in. We've actually had founders at Founders Den from countries all over the world. So we've had people from Japan and Israel and India and Finland and all over the place. So somehow those people did manage to get there, and that's what I prefer. The emails that I get cold every day are usually a poor fit. Like people emailing me every day for things to invest in that oftentimes have no relevance to the things I'm interested in. If somebody sent a cold email and was actually a good email, I mean, I might pay attention to it, but I would prefer to get something through an introduction. And I mean, as well, if you think about it, I mean, like starting Friendster and running Founders Den, I'm obviously the kind of person who likes networks and
Yeah.
networking.
Have you ever done a deal from a cold email? This is one of
I
those.
don't think I have. I mean, I've only done around 50-something. So, if there's a VC who's done hundreds over, decades, maybe they've done one. I haven't. And, we actually got, it's kind of funny, like we got somebody who sent an email to Founders Den just recently to info@foundersden.com, and he said, hey, I was referred by so-and-so, who is somebody that is a friend of mine who's sitting at Founders Den as part of our community. And our office manager was like, oh, since he was referred by that person, and I said, well, that's not a referral. We don't even know if that person knows the other person. So I actually emailed the guy and I said, do you know this person? He said, no, I've never heard of this person in my life. So a lot of those emails are just pretty weird for some reason.
Kind of trying to, talk about faking it till you're making it. That's like faking a relationship.
I don't know. I mean, when I moved to Silicon Valley from Canada, within 2 years, I'd raised my first $1 million in venture capital funding. And what I found in Silicon Valley, which really makes this community unique, is that people like you or people, lawyers, accountants, everybody you know is like, oh yeah, I can introduce you to this VC or that VC. That's like, it's sort of like, shopping on your screenplay in Hollywood or whatever. It's so much part of how things work here. So if you can't find somebody, who can help you with that, it's kind of weird because there's so many people around, in this ecosystem who do that all the time. In fact, if you're a VC, just dealing with the emails that you get from the referrals oftentimes is so much that you can barely keep up with the volume.
Yeah, for sure. I find, and see if you agree or disagree, one of the best ways, especially if you're new to Silicon Valley, to get into target investors is to make friends with portfolio company founders, because they're often a little more receptive to the cold email or the hey, can I buy you coffee approach as a sort of backdoor. And do you get many deals coming through your 50 portfolio companies?
Of course, sure. I mean, you get it from every source, and I think if somebody's trying to develop their Silicon Valley network, there's so many ways to do it. I mean, when I first moved here, I would go to all these events. With a few years after that, after I became a funded entrepreneur, I started organizing some of those events. And this conference probably has volunteers, and and I think I originally met you through events that you were organizing. So I think there's anybody who really wants to get networked into the world, all they have to do is sort of step up and volunteer and try to help out with things, whether it's hosting a meetup or whatever. And then if you do that, you start meeting people.
I think putting on an event, believe it or not, is actually a pretty good hack to build your brand and exposure. When we were getting Founder Suite off the ground, we put on a series of Funding 2.0 events and sold out everything and got a lot of buzz around it. And they're very easy to put on, believe it or not, if you have at least one or two organizational bones in your body.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a lot of work to put on a good event, but I think it's worth it. It does get you a lot of networking value. And I actually met two of the partners at Founders Den. I originally met them because they were running the TEDx SF events in San Francisco. And one of the guys that they invited to be one of the original speakers was a VC friend of mine, and he hooked me with them. And then I became friends with them, and then I spoke at one of their events, and then we ended up starting Founders Den together. And we've thrown a lot of events at Founders Den, and that's a really sort of good networking boost even for us.
Cool. All right. I'm going to fill a little bit more time here, but as we wait for the start of the show.
He's here.
Okay, cool. Well, sure. Does anyone have a question for prolific angel investor and Founders Den, Jonathan Abrams? Who's got a question? Make it a good one. Let's not waste anyone's time. Great question. So if you couldn't hear, what are you interested in? What type of deal? What level of traction, categories?
Sure. So what kind of investment I'm interested in? So I pretty much only invest in software. If you go and look at my LinkedIn page or my Crunchbase page or my AngelList page or my personal website or probably 7 other things, you'd probably see a list of some of my investments. I invest in both consumer and enterprise software and infrastructure software. At Founders Den, though, we've had more broad than that. I mean, we've had hardware companies, biotech companies, all sorts of different kinds of companies.
So diversity in terms of industry, how about stage? Is it all seed, pre-seed, or, product market fit?
Yeah, I invest as early as possible, so, generally very, very early, and sometimes it can be, same with Founders Den, it can be an experienced entrepreneur who we've known for a long time, or if it's somebody, first-time entrepreneur, they've got a prototype or some product built or something like that.
Okay, cool. One more quick one, gentleman over here.
What would be your recommendation if you're trying to build an enterprise SaaS that really needs to get a large investment of $5 million or more before you actually do a build out?
Maybe repeat it quickly, short version of that.
If you're building an enterprise SaaS and you really need a large scale investment at the pre-seed stage because you need to build it right and it's a ubiquitous software for the entire maybe global landscape, if you needed to raise a large amount of capital rather than small increments of 100,000 at a time, what would be your recommendation if you needed to have an initial investment of 5 million plus?
Well, these days, 2, 3, million is not even considered that big for seed rounds because there's so much money sloshing around Silicon Valley and San Francisco. But one of the attractions of software is that it's capital efficient compared to hardware companies or biotech companies or a lot of that. So, I'd still need to know why that's the case. If it's an experienced team coming out of a enterprise company that's very experienced, they would, and they're building something based on their domain experience, you'd typically think they'd be able to raise that kind of money. And if it wasn't, then they'd probably have to, if it's a couple engineers, they'd probably have to figure out a way to build a prototype and prove it out. So it really depends on, also the assets of the founding team.
Okay.
All right.
Awesome.
Thank you. A round of applause for Jonathan.